While the title is extremely long for this presentation, the overall goal is to introduce ways to marry business strategy with litigation strategy so that inside and outside counsel can form what we call a trusted advisor relationship. We have tried to put in QR codes for this presentation, and the very first one, let me move through here. It's working. So we want everybody in the audience to use their phone, scan that QR code, and generally answer, what is the role of litigation counsel? We've got 4 choices for you here, and as the numbers come in, I'll also kind of give the answer away so that we don't spend too much time discussing this. But what we've kind of put before you is, are we here to create battles, to research without ceasing, to answer anticipated questions, or show the client you care by billing the most hours possible? Now, as you read through those, and you've all taken multiple choice questions before, so you may kind of know where I'm headed with this slide, but I'll give you a minute to answer this question. You know what, at 80%, I feel like we know where this is going, so here's what I want to present to you as the actual counsel's task. As litigation counsel, we're here to answer questions, and not just any questions. What directions are the courts moving on a particular issue? Will a jury find the expert persuasive? If everything breaks our way, what damages are there? What counterclaims can we anticipate? These are the questions that plague every litigation, and they shouldn't surprise any of you. And as we're tasked with answering these questions, unfortunately, we've come up with some fruitless processes that don't truly get to what our in-house counsel clients need. So today we're going to identify the fruitless processes, explain client expectations. Brooke's going to be handling the majority of that, and then present what we've called the trusted advisor tips. So the first fruitless process that we have before you is that what I call working in a silo. Another QR code. And if you want to answer it, fine. If not, we'll just talk through it. So true or false, you prefer to work with your office door closed or open. True or false, you prefer working on a project on your own rather than in a group. So here's where we're going with this. In the typical situation, you receive a call from you receive a call as outside counsel. The client calls you with a problem. You go off on your own way. You answer the problem. You come back and you report your solution to the client, and you probably never hear from the client again. Well, why is that? Because you didn't collaborate with the client. And the reason that outside counsel tends to work this way is because we have a typical lawyer trait. We are skeptical, which means that new ideas, new technologies scare us. For example, I read an article that said lawyers were afraid to move away from the typewriter for the longest time, and lawyers had a tendency not to use elevators because they were also scared of the technology. We're fiercely independent. It's easier to work autonomously. We like the flexibility of it, and we want to manage our own schedules. And a lot of us suffer from analysis paralysis, but these results can be detrimental to the working relationship that must happen between inside and outside counsel. Go ahead.
Okay, so client expectation number 1, collaboration. Clients seek to collaborate, and I know if you are outside counsel, you're probably thinking, well, I already collaborate with my counsel. I get the case, I work it up, and then I update them along the way, right? Well, clients want to be part of your team when it comes to litigation. That is the opposite of the solo operator working in a silo that Skylar just talked about. In-house counsel departments, of course, I can't speak for all of them, but I imagine many of the Fortune 100 companies are looking at similar things as we are. In-house counsel departments want to use their own in-house resources, okay, because it saves us money. So for our litigation task, there's a lot of things we want to start doing in-house, but we can't do that if outside counsel is not collaborating with us. Okay, gone are the days when in-house counsel simply looked at invoices. That's where we saw your narrative, and then we signed off on it. Okay, we are managing it much more hands-on. This is a graphic created by the LPM Institute. It shows the great disconnect between where in-house counsel is and where outside counsel might be on the matter when we fail to communicate and collaborate together. My favorite on here, you look at the bottom left there, how the partner envisioned it. It's very comfy armchair, okay? And if you look at the bottom right, what the client actually wanted, a tire swing. Two totally different things. And if you look right next to that tire swing, the lawyer and client communications were non-existent. Okay, and I'm just guessing here, but probably that comfy armchair cost the client a lot more than that tire swing that they actually wanted. And when I talk about collaboration, I mean the whole time, right? Not just when you get the case and you have an initial strategy meeting and then you're off to the races and run with it. We want to be involved throughout. The old normal of just increasing your substantive legal knowledge for outside counsel is not enough anymore. I'll use myself as an example. When I look back over my own legal career, I spent way more time in private practice than I have in-house, at least so far. And I was really a good example of this. I mean, when I was outside counsel, I worked on my substantive legal knowledge, and I thought, if I'm an expert in my area of the law, then surely clients are going to hire me, right? That's how we get our cases. But being in-house, I've had to learn so much more. Business acumen is incredibly important. Being extremely efficient is very important because everything we do impacts the company's bottom line. And then we have to be able to predict risk for the organization. And so because I have to get good at those things as the client, and I have to use that to advise my clients, then I expect my outside counsel to help me out in those areas.
So how are we going to remedy this disconnect between lawyers wanting to work in a silo and in-house counsel wanting us to be a part of their team to really collaborate on any issue? The first tip that we want to suggest is create a litigation project management plan with your in-house counsel. So you have to have a plan because otherwise things just go by the wayside. And any lawyer who has ever managed a matter or planned a budget has acted as a project manager. Project manager types are taught in business school. These skill sets are not taught at law schools. And so we fail in these aspects. But there's a movement now to force all of us to take our litigations and really create a plan from the very beginning with your in-house counsel so that you can truly anticipate and answer the questions as a team. There we go. And so here's really what we're talking about. From the beginning, define and manage your scope of work. Just like any good contract that you've ever seen, if you've built a house, if you've input a pool, there is a plan for how to get from point A to point B. And the first process of that, even in litigation, is define and manage the scope of work. For example, if they want a tire swing, do they want 5 depositions of 5 key people? Or if they want an armchair connected to the tree because it's that important, do we really need to take 20 depositions? You can decide that from the beginning of the case, and you can set that out in your scope of work so that you're all on the same page. Second, assign time, resources, and budget, again, from the beginning. Are you working with an in-house team that already has litigators that can do hands-on motion drafting, maybe even show up to hearings? Unlikely, but if possible, use the internal resources that the client has to save on your budget. I wouldn't know whether or not Brooke wants to write a motion unless I ask Brooke if she wants to write the motion. We can talk about that from the beginning. I'm not suggesting that we send out, a 30 question questionnaire each time you start a litigation, but if you have a plan in place for these different phases of your litigation and you talk about who is appropriately assigned to them, not only are you better managing your resources, but you're also better managing your budget. Now, you may come together and you put this beautiful plan, and then it just sits on somebody's desk. Well, now you failed to execute your plan. So you need to have a project manager. Most litigations have two partners, maybe not, but if you have one partner on the case, that person can be both the project manager and the lead counsel. If you have two, there can be a partner specifically assigned to making sure these tasks are being executed appropriately. The biggest issue is making sure that risks are addressed on time. So we all know, and maybe you're thinking it right now, there's a lot of unknowns in litigation. You have opposing counsel on the other side who's going to dramatically change the plan that you've put together. If your scope of work has to change, ask your client, how do you want me to address those issues with you? Do you want me to send you an email right away that says, look what he's done, and now I have to respond to that? Should we have one point person? Should we talk regularly, a weekly meeting? This is just about communicating and collaborating with your client so that you're building the tire swing and not the armchair.
Yeah, let me just add there that the key thing is that you're building this plan with your client. Don't go back into that silo mode. Now, of course, your client will appreciate it if you take the lead on the plan, right? But show it to them. Have a phone call. Walk through it. Make sure that they understand and agree with what the plan is, because they may have some changes. This may sound a little unfair to, you law firm lawyers, but we, the client, expect you to already be the expert in the area of the case that we hired you for. If you're not, we could have hired someone else and saved, a considerable amount of money there. That said, we understand there may be unique issues in our case. So you may need to do some additional research. You may need to do some special filings because opposing counsel is, being ridiculous. But I don't want to learn that you've had to do those things for the first time when I'm reviewing your invoice. I want to know about it along the way, and I want to be involved in those strategy decisions.
Because litigation project management plans may be new to you, but are not new in our field, I've included some of the great resources here that can provide you a little bit more information on what we're talking about. There is literally an entire book discussing how you create these management plans so that you can truly answer the client's questions. I've put together a template here on a litigation work breakdown that's high level, what you expect from every litigation. And if you start there and then you move into assigning your resources and executing your plan, then you have a really good foundation for not going off budget, or in our world, not having a bunch of write-offs because we've overstepped or overstated what we were going to provide for the client. Oh, here's another one. So the second,
I think before we move on, let's just kind of sum up that one and then see if you guys have any questions. But I think the key is collaboration looks different now than it used to. And because in-house departments more than likely want to be more involved. We have some people on our team who have the bandwidth right now to draft motions. Now, that wasn't the case 6 months ago. We were all incredibly slammed. But now we've got some people with some bandwidth. So just make sure that you are actually having those conversations. Any questions so far on collaboration or a litigation management plan?
So this next fruitless process is the tendency to suggest clients flip a coin. We, as outside counsel, again, are paid to answer the tough questions. More often than not, we go a regretful shrug, or we say, well, it's litigation, I don't know. And essentially what we're telling the client is flip a coin, see what happens. That's not helpful, and it also doesn't use the expertise and the experience that we have. So because this is our tendency right now, move forward. Okay, so true or false, you write substantive emails that require the client to scroll. I'm going to skip. Are we skipping QR codes at this point, or you want to?
I think we have time. Okay,
all right. We'll let you answer the question. So scan the QR code and answer true or false. You write substantive emails that require the client to scroll. No one wants to admit this.
We all know that you do, because I get them sometimes. And I've drafted them myself too.
Either one person's answered or all of you are writing these emails. Either way, I'll move on to the second question. True or false, you focus on the unknown when refusing to value a case. And again, maybe you guys have already seen where we're going with this, but the reality is this fruitless process is always the case. It's so much easier to provide step-by-step instructions to the client, these long emails that say, it could be this, it could be this. Here's a hypothetical. What about this unknown? We feel like we're providing, I'm speaking for others and maybe myself as well, we feel like we're providing a service because we're giving you all the information. Here's all the information that we've spent our valuable time finding for you. But at the end of the day, what we're really doing is giving you that information and not providing a service. We're not following up with, and here's what we advise you to do. We're punting back to the client. And that's a problem, because why were we hired? Brooke is smarter than me. She could also collect all of that information and come to the decision. So why am I providing that information to her if I'm not also advising her potentially about what the next step should be? And when we focus on the unknown, we're not giving a reality. We're not giving an answer. So we write these really long memos, or we give these really long presentations, and at the end of the day, we've provided unspecific projections and unquantified client interests. And that is fruitless because it's not helpful. So what does the client actually expect us to do?
Quantified transparency. Clients want to know what is going on in our cases. We want you to have done your homework, hopefully based on that litigation management plan that we just created together. And we want real answers. So this is the quantified part. I don't want to just know that we have a more likely than not chance of success, or such a wide range that you tell me, well, our chances of winning on MSJ are, 50 to 100%. That doesn't help me, right? I need you to be more specific, okay? And keep in mind, I've been in your shoes. I'm not going to hold you to that 75% that you tell me, because I know the unexpected things that happen in litigation, and I know that you are not promising me or guaranteeing me a result. If you guys draft those memos, and I was very guilty of this in private practice, if you draft those memos towards the beginning of the case because your client has asked for it, especially if you do any insurance defense work, EPLI work, or something like that, there's all these standard memos they want. And in there, you'll say a little bit about the judge. You'll say a little bit about what the jury makeup will be. You'll say what you know about opposing counsel. And then you'll get into all the substantive questions, and you end with things like, it is too early to assess whether we will prevail on MSJ, or it is too early to give you a settlement value. And that does me no good. It doesn't help me prepare for anything in that case, or to start to prepare my business clients for how much money this is going to cost them, whether that's in attorney's fees or in the actual settlement value of the case. So the client's main questions are going to be, what should we do? What is it worth? And what are the chances? Those thorough and comprehensive memos that you draft that make me scroll through your email or read 3 pages, that don't have a logical and transparent end with some specifics in it, again, that's useless. It does not help me at all. Keep in mind that most of the time you are dealing with knowledgeable in-house counsel. Okay, not business folks. I know that's not always true. If you represent smaller companies, you may have, HR or business professionals as your main contact. But when you're dealing with in-house counsel, get to know them. If you are representing an in-house counsel who is managing litigation for the company, they were probably a litigator in private practice before they went in-house. Of course, that's not always the case. But there's a good chance of that. They may even have more private practice experience than you did. So get to know your client so that you can anticipate what they need and on what level you need to speak to them. Know your audience.
I'll jump in with these questions as well, because the what should we do, it would be impossible for outside counsel to define and answer that question without knowing what is the client's objective for success. There are times when the success is do everything that you can to win this litigation. We don't want 75 more of these cases. And that may be your marching orders, and that's what you go and do. But there's other times where they say, we want this to be resolved as quickly as possible. Or we want you to make sure that this doesn't hit the news. There are so many definitions of success, and it requires outside counsel to have that conversation to find out how the client is defining success in each particular case. With the what's it all worth, yeah, I do think that you can come to true settlement values on most litigations, providing the tips that we're going to go into. But like Brooke said, this is a range. But taking an arbitrary number that says this is a $20 million litigation without having any backup for that is not helpful. Mm-hmm. Or saying that this case should probably settle for like maybe the $5,000 to $50,000 range, also not helpful. So you really need to dig in, and I'm already skipping to the trusted advisor status, so I'll take a step back. But these are the true questions that you have to ask and talk to your client about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and keep in mind that what you give me, I've got to analyze that, I've got to narrow it down, and then I've got to take that to my business clients. And I have to be able to advise them on the risks of the case, the risks of moving forward, how many business people are going to be deposed, how long are the business folks going to have to dedicate to collecting documents, things like that, things that take away from what their actual job is, which all gets back to making money for the company, right? And so they're going to be pulled away from those actual business needs and inconvenienced. So when you're thinking about what to give me, get down to specific numbers if we're looking at resolving a case. And that's for not only your fees, and I don't want just a standard budget that you would use for all of your lawsuits. I want to know how much my case is going to cost. I want to know where we are in discovery, where we are in depositions. Hopefully you've been talking to me throughout about that, but I want to know exactly where we are so that I know how many people are we about to pull in and involve in this, and I know exactly what we're about to spend. And then for the settlement, yes, it's okay. You can give me a range. I can take that. I can narrow it down to the number I'm going to ask the business for, but don't make that range, as Skylar said, 5 to 500. Make that range as close as you can and as specific as you can.
So what I put up is a summary of what we've just been talking about, what plaintiffs need to know, what defendants need to know. So if you want to go ahead and move on to this chart here, I pulled some PLI survey results to really establish how much of an issue this is. Law firms, amount of transparency most timekeepers have regarding your matter budgets, clients' expectations, and overall status. And these numbers range, but the biggest one would be 22%. Most people inside the law firm don't know how much transparency is actually happening. And even worse, in-house counsel finds transparency extremely important. Sorry, I moved on. So you need to provide that as a service. And if you're answering these big questions, how do we answer them? How do we really get to the real numbers of a litigation that we just started?
Yeah, these slides were really telling to me, those graphics, because you look at your in-house counsel want that transparency. It's really high. I mean, 90% said it's extremely important. But the slide before that showed that there's not a lot of transparency with your associates, with your paralegals that are working on the cases. And it raises a lot of issues. I've had occasions where I find myself writing off associate and paralegal time because they were doing tasks that weren't focused on that plan. And one just little tip for those of you at law firms, if you anticipate that that time is going to get written off, go ahead and do that yourself and mark that as a no charge or free or something discounted, something so that the client sees that, because they will find value in that when you have gone ahead and taken the initiative to write off the time. One other thing I'll say, I'll just use another story from my own private practice. I remember representing a client. I had gotten a great result. It was in my state. I was not the relationship partner. But had handled the case. We got a great result. I drafted up my usual standard settlement agreement, sent it over that I used in my state, sent it over to the client, and got an immediate response back of, well, why isn't this our settlement agreement? Well, because I didn't know you had a standard settlement agreement. So the relationship partner had failed to tell me that that client used a standard settlement agreement. So we could have avoided that in the beginning if there had been that transparency and I had known those things that the client wanted.
Getting into our second trusted advisor tip, Brooke, I think you actually wanted to start this, but yeah, go ahead.
No, what I was going to say, Skylar is going to go into some detail on a decision tree analysis. And the thing that I wanted to point out is that I have never used this particular version of a decision tree analysis. So it's just one thing. And as she goes through this, keep in mind that there are lots of different ways that you can get to those very specific recommendations that we want and that you can be transparent with the client. Pick the one that is comfortable with you, or when you're collaborating with the client, ask them what they like and maybe use that one. I can assure you it's not, I don't want you to bill me more because you're coming up with the way that I like to do it or some other way. She's going to go through an actual decision tree. There's risk cubes, there's project charts, there's flow charts, there's lots of different things that you can do.
So decision tree analysis, I need to give full credit to Mark Victor, who actually has litigation risk analysis trademarked. So he taught me how to do decision trees. It took 8 hours. I'm not teaching all of you right now how to do decision trees. It's essentially a dependency diagram. It is most often used by engineers. They're actually now teaching it in medical school because it is truly a way to make life or death situations. And when it comes to litigation, we can apply the same principles to create mathematical probabilities of success. Now, hear what I said. Probabilities. I am not suggesting that as you get these from outside counsel, they are guaranteeing that these are the results. But what you're essentially doing is you are taking from left to right, what does a litigation depend upon? And as you move through these branches, because you're doing this, let me step back. You're doing this with the experts of the case. So what I would do, for example, is I would call Brooke and I would say, when can we get our team together? Brooke, myself, probably some other people from Perkins, Coie, and definitely some other people from Tyson, including the fact witnesses of one particular case. Probably if it's an employment case, because Brooke does employment, we grab HR. We go ahead and perform an early case assessment, and then we sit in a room and we talk through the entire case as much as we know to that point. And what we're essentially laying out from this left to right format are the chances of success each time a judge or jury makes a decision. So we start basically with litigate or settle, and then we move through the facts that are, this is not an employment case, but we move through the facts that are important and that depend upon the left to right flow. Now, the numbers that you see underneath are what your outside counsel is providing to you as your probabilities of success. So there's a 60% chance that the jury finds the component did not meet contract specs. There's a 40% chance that they did meet. Those numbers, again, are not arbitrary. What Mark Victor says is garbage in, garbage out. If you are still pulling numbers out of thin air to create your decision tree, then you're not getting very far in your actual analysis. But you think through, okay, I've done this many contract cases and with this particular provision, looking at the data analytics, which we have so much of now, there is a 60% chance of success. It may also be that this particular judge always rules this way, or 60% of the time rules this way. So you were using the same knowledge that you've been using as lawyers your entire career, but you're writing down the probabilities. Because if you ask me 6 months into a litigation, what did I anticipate or what's going to happen, I've probably forgotten the probabilities somewhere in the background. And this dependency diagram makes you, in the beginning, write it down so that, one, you create more space in your mind, actually, as you write things down. You can actually do higher creative thinking because you've taken out some of the short-term issues. But you're also putting it together so that you can get to a value. And there's still a range. If you look at the end, you see that the jury may award $10 million or $20 million. That's a smaller range than what Brooke and I had been talking about earlier. But you're also seeing the chances that the jury awards that amount. And the way that we get to these numbers is simple multiplication. So taking one, for example, if I multiplied the 60% times the 75% times the 1, then I'm creating this dependency diagram that gets me to the $4 million settlement value as a percentage of the overall case. Okay, I personally have a confession. My only C in school was in statistics. I did not do very well with these types of numbers, and even I can do this math. I don't want to bog you down on how to perform this decision tree analysis because it truly does take a lot of thinking, and the first one that I did took hours and hours and hours. I'm just showing you that there is a way to use logic and math with the analytical skills that you've already applied as lawyers to get to less than arbitrary numbers. That's all I'm proposing. And like Brooke said, risk cubes, project charts, there's other ways, but please don't just regretfully shrug your shoulders when you're valuing a case, either to your business clients or to your in-house counsel, because it's not helpful. No one knows what they're going to do with that case, and no one has a plan of action.
Let me add something real quick, Skylar. You mentioned early case assessment, and this is a big deal for us right now at Tyson, something that we're working on. And historically, we were sort of a company that just fought things out on principle. And so we are now trying to rein that in a little bit and really triage our cases, and we need help from outside counsel to do this. So I do employment law, and so early on, we know the facts. I mean, of course, there are random things that might come up, but we pretty much know the story of what happened. We define early case assessment as the aggressive pursuit of the end game, and because we know what happened early on, we would want you to do this analysis early, okay? Use the facts you've got. We already did an investigation at the EEOC stage, so we already have things that have been done that you can use. But we want to know at the beginning, what are my chances of winning on MSJ? Is this a case I can resolve for nuisance value? Or is this a case with some real risk? Is there a red flag of some sort that you've seen? That's going to help me triage those cases into a low risk, medium risk, and high risk bucket so that I know what to do with that. And I want to know it early before I've spent a lot in fees.
One thing that I wanted to point out, just using this slide, it sounds really convoluted and a lot of math, and it truly is not once you sit down and think through it. So Mark Victor, I mentioned him already. Some facts about him to give you a little bit more comfort that this truly can be done. He's helped to evaluate hundreds of cases, including some of the largest and most complex ever filed, many of which settled for more than $1 billion. Then he went on to write articles with the in-house team from ConocoPhillips, which was one of his major clients, to explain how this is working, and he has trained over 10,000 in-house attorneys, claims managers, outside counsel, and law students. So he's still training to this day. As I mentioned, he taught me decision tree analysis, and would gladly come to your in-house departments and teach you decision tree analysis if you're interested in it. But it really is, again, like Brooke mentioned, it's just getting to the final stages. And one thing I mentioned here is these are evolving. So you start, the first picture is actually like, I don't want you to tune me out because decision tree analysis does sound daunting. And then the second thing is, as a litigator, I completely understand that we're building a house and the other side is tearing it down at night. I know that there are unknowns and things that change, but your decision tree can move, can evolve with your litigation. It is a way for Brooke and I to value the case from the beginning, get that settlement value. Maybe we come to, this is only going to cost you this much money, much better business decision for us to put your facts aside and start negotiating heavily with settlement. Maybe we find out that it's going to be much larger, and so then we can reevaluate our resources and set it up. But as we get to that motion for summary judgment phase and we look at our decision tree and we had a 40% chance of success, but we won it, well, that completely deletes the rest of the decision tree. The other thing is if we're at, we lose, then we can follow the decision tree further and we can move our numbers around and reevaluate. But it is a way to put this plan in place from the beginning, and it will help you. I've even seen decision trees used at mediation, for example. Someone showed up to the mediation with their analytics. That's very persuasive. They have thought through this case. They know what it's valued at, and they are going to be able to negotiate from those percentage points. Do you have anything to add on this slide?
Nope.
Okay. Chock full of client benefits, the decision tree analysis. Like I said, it slows down the litigation. I think a lot of people get in the door and they're like, okay, let's start discovery, or let's just get the answer on file, or let's just be defensive. It turns it into an offensive approach. You now look like you're more prepared than the other side, and as a defense lawyer, that's a big deal. It gives you the analytical roadmap that we talked about. It provides the transparency that the client is looking for. And it gets back to the business, knowing what the business decision needs to be. So I wanted to provide some resources. Oh, it was funny that you mentioned triage casing, because triage software is actually who created that decision tree. So they actually have a software platform that builds the branches for you as you input the numbers, and you can move the legs around. It's very helpful. I don't work there, and I don't pay for it or whatever. I've just used it before. Mark Victor also helps triage build its platform, but he is not directly linked with triage. And then Perkins Coie, I am directly linked with Perkins Coie, and we just happen to have an article on litigation risk assessment. Okay, so our final process is called ghosting the client. I fully confess that this is something that I have done. I've received a litigation, I followed it to the end, we settled, or we won, or we lost, whatever the result might be. I then walked away and turned my attention elsewhere. I didn't follow up with the client in the immediate future, and most of the time I just let the client go, unless it's a good friend of mine. So I'm just confessing that to you, that this is something that's happened. The problem here, besides just the fact that ghosting shows you there's a negative connotation with this, and that I called it a fruitless process, you don't know what you did right or wrong in the litigation. I didn't give the chance for anybody to tell me whether they liked the motion, whether they appreciated the weekly phone calls, whether they wanted me to be more aggressive in this spot or another spot, whether they liked my decision tree. I gave no opportunity for feedback. And a good story that I heard, a good analogy for this, is you go to your dry cleaner, you provide them a sweater, and it comes back with one knit. I'm probably still gonna go to that dry cleaner because it was just a one-time thing, but that knit didn't bother me enough to explain to the dry cleaner, hey, you actually got a knit in my sweater and I didn't appreciate that, can you pay more attention next time? Because it wasn't a big enough deal. But if the dry cleaner again and again causes these little bitty problems, well, that adds up to a bigger problem, and then I stop going to that dry cleaner. So similarly with litigators, Brooke may have one problem with something that I did, but it didn't rise to the level of a conversation. I didn't blow up a bill. I didn't do anything huge such that she really needed to talk to me about it. But as I keep sending her emails that she has to scroll through, she just stops coming back to me because I'm not providing her the service that she needs, but it never got to the point where she had to tell me about it, and I never gave her the opportunity to tell me about it. So what does the client really want?
So we want a long-term relationship. Some of our firms that have done our work for years, they know our industry, they know our business, and so there's a lot that doesn't have to happen to educate that law firm that does when we hire somebody new. Similar to Skylar, when I was in private practice, I was bad about ghosting the client. If it was, my own personal client, then of course I was better. But if you've been in a big firm, you know that a lot of times your work is not your own personal client. It's somebody else's, the relationship partner, and you're doing it because it happened to be filed in your state. Check with the relationship attorney, obviously, that you don't want the client to be getting hundreds of emails from across the country. But keep in mind that your client might not just be managing litigation, waiting on the next case and ready to hand that out to a firm. They may also be providing advice and counsel to an entire organization, and maybe for a region or a particular state or something like that. So again, don't bug them, but don't hesitate to reach out with a law in your state that has recently been passed that is going to impact their business and that they'll want to know about. And send them the article that your firm wrote, because probably there is one, or even just to say hello. This is another survey from PLI, and it's asking, do you conduct a debrief at the end of a phase of a matter? According to the chart, it looks like quite a few firms may be debriefing at the end of a matter, or more likely, it looks like only if you had problems. I've actually never had a law firm ask me to have a full debrief on a matter or at a phase of a matter. I typically get a last email with the dismissal and a thank you, and then the last bills trickle in, and that's it, until they see the next case filed against us in a courthouse news report, and then I get that email from 5 or 10 firms that want that case. Now, I've had to affirmatively reach out, or I've had firms affirmatively reach out if there was an error of some sort made throughout the case, if there's a bill or something that we needed to discuss, but not to actually ask me how did everything go in general. And on this one, does your post-matter review involve the client in some manner? With law firms answering this, it looks like many firms are doing some kind of post-matter review. But if you add up those no rows, the top and the bottom, that's over 50% that are not doing any kind of review with your client. And I think it's great that law firms are doing those reviews internally, but I would strongly urge you to include your client. I mean, it's the client's case, right? It's the company that got sued, and you were representing them in that one particular case, but there could be enterprise-wide impacts from that case. They want to discuss those with you. So put some time on their calendar. Talk about how things went, whether there was anything that the firm could do better in the future. The client may want to know, too, what we could have done. If you had to seek 3 discovery extensions because we couldn't get you documents fast enough, I want to know about that because I've got to work with my staff to improve that as well. And then pass on that transparency to your associates and your paralegals that are working on the cases so that they know those things that you came up with that you could do better, and they know about that next time. Remember that your client is busy, okay? Continue providing a service. Do the post-litigation briefing session. Compose some general best practices. Again, share those. Communicate regularly, but not annoyingly, okay? In-house counsel is busy from I always say from 8 to 5:30 or 6 whenever I actually hang it up for the day. I'm way busier now than I used to be in private practice in that window because I've got client calls. They all have access to my calendar and put meetings on it all day long. So if you're in-house, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But keep in mind, think of something that might be helpful to that client. If you know that they do business in a particular state or city, and there's just been a city ordinance that came out that requires paid sick leave for employees or something like that, send them that article or that law.
I think here the only thing I want to touch on is the composing general best practices. I have found it so very helpful when a relationship partner or someone else sends me this slide deck that they've put together about the client. It may not surprise Brooke. We have one on Tyson. I know what narratives she's going to reject. I know what timekeeping requirements she has. I know what the history of Tyson, who started it and how. There's information that you can put together on these clients that you then distribute so that when I call her, she doesn't surprise me with, well, our GC just left. How did you not know that? Why are you calling me about this article you read when I literally have been in the news for the last 24 hours? So sending out these best practices for any client, not just bigger clients, is really helpful because then your internal team knows what's going on and can provide the better service. That's what we're here for. The litigation debriefing sessions recently just really blew my mind because I had a temporary injunction. That's not a time, as I'm preparing for a temporary injunction, for me to say, what should I have done differently? Because we're really hot and heavy for those 2 weeks that we're getting ready for that. But as we submitted the brief, I put it on his calendar for 2 weeks away for him and I to discuss what could have worked better in that 2-week time frame so that if this happens again, I know what he or she is expecting from me. And some of it was just very minor points, like this affidavit should have been this way. So it's just giving the client the opportunity to really give you feedback. And I mention this now because I wanted, before we end, and we're pretty close to that, I've got a 1-pager that Brooke and I put together, literally just 1.5 front and back, giving the overall tips of today and some of the things that we've talked about. And if you want one, come get one from me. But I would also like, if any of you guys want to come up here and give me feedback right now, let us know what was helpful about this presentation and what was not helpful. If you like the QR codes or not, because they actually took a significant amount of resources to get put together. And one more QR code that I really do want your feedback on is how many of you are conducting these debriefing sessions with your client when a litigation concludes. So if you could answer this for me, I'm just curious if this is really going on, and if so, I'd like to talk to you about how helpful you have found them.
I will now. That's somebody's being honest down there.
Great. I'm also just generally so surprised that this technology exists.
Yes.
I wish we could do these for juries. How many of you believe what I just said? Please. Great. Well, thank you all very much for participating today or listening to us. And again, if you want this one pager, if you have any questions, if you want to follow up on any of the stuff that we talked about, please let us know. Otherwise, we appreciate your time. If you don't have any questions, we've got 1 minute left if you do. Thank you.
Thank you.